Oh, hi, it's your old buddy Zoo, and today we're doing something a little bit different because I'm not necessarily reviewing a device. I'm reviewing like 6 devices, but no, I'm reviewing more of an idea. Specifically the idea that sometimes the best handheld for a given device isn't the most expensive one. It's not the most powerful one. It's not the newest one. It's the one that just feels right. Here's what I mean. You ever pick up a handheld or a controller, and your fingers and your thumbs and even your hands, they know exactly where to go. And that's not an accident, it's muscle memory. Your thumbs knew where the buttons were years ago, and they haven't forgotten. And when the device is wrong, when the buttons are slightly off, when the sticks are at the wrong angles, your hands know it, oftentimes before your brain even realizes it. So today I went system by system and I asked one simple question, a lonely, simple question. Scott Stapp. Anyway, my simple question was, which devices make me feel like I'm holding the original hardware they are trying to emulate? Not necessarily the best price, not necessarily the best performance, but the device that makes me feel like I'm holding a Super Nintendo controller or holding an NES controller. It has the best fit, the best form factor, the best screen ratio. Anyway, stick with me, and let's get to it. All right, we're starting with the one that kind of kicked off the whole line of thinking for me. The Super Nintendo, one of the best controllers ever designed. They had those soft, convex A, B, X, Y buttons with different shapes, different colors. Your thumb always knew which one it was on without looking. L and R shoulder buttons that actually mattered for the first time in console history, and a comfortable, palm-friendly grip. And for a long time, I was playing SNES on devices where none of that was quite right. The buttons were flat, the screen was too wide. Something was always slightly off. And then I picked up the RG353P. This thing runs an RK3566 processor, which is plenty of power for anything that Super Nintendo is going to throw at you. It's got a 3.5-inch 4x3 screen, which matters because SNES games ran natively at 4x3. You're not getting black bars, you're not stretching anything. The image just fills the screen the way it's supposed to. But here's the real thing, the thing that got me. The handheld itself, the button layout, the shape. Anbernic clearly looked at a Super Nintendo controller when they designed this. The face buttons are arranged in the right way. The L and R triggers sit exactly where your index fingers want to rest. Holding this device feels like holding a Super Nintendo controller, not a toy. That's pretty cool, and it's also pretty compelling because it doesn't feel like an emulation device that happens to run Super Nintendo. It feels like Super Nintendo. One of my very first devices in this scene was the Pocket Go S30, which was SNES styled, but it had a lot of issues. This is better in every conceivable way, and since the Super Nintendo can be emulated on a potato, it's not likely to be eclipsed anytime soon. Now, if you're looking to spend some time with the RG353P, here are 3 Zoo-approved games I'd put on it immediately. ActRaiser, a quintet game from 1990 that should not work. It's half side-scrolling action platformer, half city-building simulation, and somehow together, they're brilliant. Yuzo Koshiro did the soundtrack, and I promise you, the first time that music hits on this little screen, you're gonna feel something. Next is Demon's Crest. Now, Firebrand, the annoying red demon from Ghosts and Goblins, he got his own game in 1994, and it's dark, and it's gorgeous, and it's genuinely hard, and almost nobody played it when it came out, because it launched 2 weeks before Donkey Kong Country. Sometimes timing is everything. And then last is Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen. It's a real-time tactical RPG that predates anything Fire Emblem was doing in the West by years. It's dense, it's slow in the best possible way. If you give it patience, it'll give you back something special. Nobody who played this game really regrets it. I rented this game at least a half dozen times, and I really didn't understand it as a kid, but something about it was intriguing. I kept going back. Next up is Game Boy, and let's talk about something that's a little bit weird until it clicks, because the Game Boy lineup, from the original DMG, the Pocket, the Color, they all had a screen that was nearly square. The resolution was 160 by 144, which is almost 1-to-1. And for years, people have been playing Game Boy games on devices with 4x3 screens, 16 by 9 screens, maybe even 3x2 screens, And every single one of those either has black bars on the sides or is stretching the image. The correct answer for playing Game Boy and Game Boy Color games is a near square screen in a vertical device. And the best option right now, I think, is the Retroid Pocket Classic. This thing has a 3.92-inch AMOLED display at a 31:27 ratio, which, much like the original Game Boy, is essentially square. And it has no analog sticks, which, let's be honest, that's not a design flaw because the Game Boy didn't have analog sticks. The Retroid Pocket Classic isn't trying to be everything, it's trying to be the right thing for a specific library of games, and it absolutely nails it. And the OLED screen makes Game Boy Color games look better than they ever have on pretty much any other hardware I've ever seen. I'm not exaggerating. Pixel art on this display is stunning. Now, the Classic is really overpowered for Game Boy games, and as of recently, it's partially discontinued through the Retroid store. There are still a ton of these available on AliExpress and on the secondary market, but if you can't find one or you don't like the price, the powkiddy RGB20SX is a genuine alternative. It's a vertical device. It has a true 1x1 square screen at 720 by 720. It has an RK3566 chip, and it costs a lot less. Stock OS on here has some issues, but put Rocknix or ArcOS on it, and you're in business. Either way, you get a device with a 1x1 or 1x1-ish screen for your 1x1-ish Game Boy games, and your eyes will thank you. And then sneaky option number 3, which might just be recency bias, but the RG Rotate is low-key amazing for Game Boy games. It has a 1x1 screen, and it looks and feels like a Game Boy Pocket when you open it up. Alright, now it's time for some games to put on these devices. Up first is Mole Mania, and this was designed by Miyamoto. That's right, the Miyamoto from Nintendo. And I'm pretty sure it's never been re-released on anything. It is a puzzle game about a mole digging tunnels and rolling barrels to reach his family. And it has more charm in its opening 5 minutes than a lot of modern games have in their entire runtime. It's sitting there, it's completely free to emulate, completely forgotten by Nintendo, and it's waiting for you. Up next is Gargoyle's Quest. That's right, Firebrand is back again. This actually came out before Demon's Crest on Super Nintendo. It is a side-scrolling platformer with an RPG overworld, and it's punishing, but in the best way. If you play this and then Demon's Crest on Super Nintendo, you can do a little unofficial Firebrand marathon on your Zoo Reviews approved devices. How about that? And then last is Dragon Warrior Monsters for the Game Boy Color, a monster breeding and battling RPG that predates a lot of what Pokemon would do later with those same mechanics. And compared to Pokemon, it's actually a longer game and a deeper game than it has any right to be on a little 2-inch handheld screen. And on the Classic, it looks incredible. Just play it. Up next, I don't know if you can tell, is Game Boy Advance. And the Game Boy Advance, both models, had a 3x2 screen. It was wide and low. And Game Boy Advance games were designed for that specific shape. The art direction, the UI layouts, just the way things were framed. Now, if you're playing Game Boy Advance games on a device with a square screen or a 4x3 screen or even a 16x9 screen, it's going to be in some way a little bit stretched. And honestly, the only way to get it right is to have a 3x2 screen. And for a while, you had a couple options, but they weren't really the same as the original Game Boy Advance or the Game Boy Advance SP. And then Anbernic made the RG34XX and then the RG34XXSP. These devices run an H700 chip which can handle Game Boy Advance games effortlessly. The screens are 3x2 and they are built for Game Boy Advance games. Integer scaling works in a way that just doesn't happen on most other devices. Your image fills the entire screen with nary a pixel out of place. On the regular 34XX, you can see it is almost a 1x1 replica. The D-pad, to their detriment, because this is a small D-pad, is exactly the same. And even though it has 4 buttons, they made the top 2 the same color so they kind of disappear. Super cool, super great attention to detail. And it's the same story here with the 34XXSP. Your D-pad is a little bit bigger. They figured out, hey, you know what? You actually might want to play these games, but otherwise, everything's in the same spot except the analog sticks, which I'm not crazy about, but I don't know. They put them there because they felt like they needed to. For First up is Riviera, the Promised Land. This is made by Sting, and it's a visual novel crossed with a JRPG crossed with something else I can't quite describe, and it's absolutely wonderful. If you've played Yggdra Union, also by Sting, the Japanese developer, by the way, not the guy from The Police, this is its companion piece, and if you haven't played either of them, then start here. Next is Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. This was the second Fire Emblem game to be released outside of Japan, and while it's not the best Fire Emblem game on the Game Boy Advance, it's probably the best game on this system to start with. It's easier than the other ones, and you have the option to grind up your units in random battles on the world map. All in all, a great way to start the series. And then we have Tactics Ogre, the Knight of Lotus. This is not the same as Ogre Battle. This is actually kind of like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, except it's much richer. It has a deep political narrative that the series is known for. It has really good gameplay mechanics, and honestly, I think it deserves way more attention than it actually got. Here's a fun one, Game Gear, Sega's answer to the Game Boy. It had a full-color backlit screen in 1990, which was genuinely incredible for the time, except the trade-off was it ran on 6 AA batteries that lasted approximately 3 hours, which, if you were a kid who had to buy batteries with their lawn mowing money, it was essentially a death sentence until you bought the AC adapter. But the library, though, the Game Gear library is genuinely underrated. It had Master System ports that were excellent. It had its own original titles and versions of Sega arcade games that held up surprisingly well. It just got buried by history. However, the GKD Bubble is a device that was clearly built by someone who loved the Game Gear. The silhouette is nearly identical. The screen placement, the elongated horizontal body. Even the green power LED is in the same spot where the Game Gear's logo used to light up. These are not accidents. This is not the greatest song in the world, no. This is just a tribute. This tribute of a handheld runs an RK3566 chip, which is plenty for the Game Gear library. Some might argue more than necessary. And it also has a 3.5-inch IPS screen that runs at 4:3. I'm not sure why they went to the trouble of making this so Game Geary and then they didn't include a 1x1 screen, but oh well. And oh, by the way, the battery life on here is dramatically better than the original hardware, which, granted, it's not a high bar, but still, you will finish a game, and that was not guaranteed on original hardware. Let's talk about my hidden gems, starting off with Defenders of Oasis. You can see it right there. This is a full JRPG on the Game Gear. It had an Arabian Nights style setting. It had a pretty good story. It had pretty good battle systems. It was genuinely impressive for the hardware it was running on, and almost nobody knows that this game exists. If you enjoy this style of RPG at all, I think this one will surprise you. Axe Battler, A Legend of Golden Axe. The name makes you think arcade brawler, but it is not an arcade brawler. It is an action RPG with exploration and upgrades and a story. Totally different from the arcade Golden Axe. And honestly, I think it's better as a handheld experience because of it. It got completely buried by the franchise name, though. And then my last hidden gem that's not even really that hidden is Shining Force 2. If you know anything about me, it's that I love tactical RPGs. And then to have a TRPG, and not just a TRPG, but a good one, like, I actually enjoy playing this game. It's amazing that this was on the Game Gear. And honestly, considering the fact that we're playing this game on a handheld that came out in 1990, the graphics are amazing. I mean, compare that to a Game Boy or Game Boy Color game. Up next is Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive to our friends outside of the US of A. And this one is simple, and the reason it's simple is because the problem is obvious once you see it. The Sega Genesis 6-button controller had 6 face buttons in 2 rows. 3 on the bottom, 3 on top. This layout was designed specifically for fighting games and action games that needed more buttons than the standard setup. Street Fighter II Special Championship Edition, Eternal Champions, even Comic Zone. Every single handheld that runs Genesis essentially compromises on this because all but a handful have 4 face buttons. Maybe there's different mappings, maybe there's something that kind of works, but it isn't quite right. Now, you've played Genesis games on devices that had 4 buttons, and you've made it work, and it's fine, but it's not all there. It's not 100% right. But the RG Arc from Anbernic is really the one exception, because it has 6 face buttons, 2 rows. The layout of this, not just the buttons, the actual feel of this, it mirrors the 6-button Genesis pad so closely that when you're playing your favorite games, your hands know what to do. Your muscle memory clicks. And it's really the only handheld I can say that about for the Genesis. Stop me if you've heard this before, but it runs an RK3566 and it has solid performance for the Genesis library. It has a larger screen than you would expect from a device in this class. And again, the 6-button layout and just the overall feel of it, it makes everything else irrelevant. But what about the Genesis hidden gems, Zoo? All right, settle down. First up, we have Crusader of Senti. This is essentially a Link to the Past on the Genesis, and I don't mean that loosely. I mean the structure, the overworld exploration, the combat, the dungeon design, even the font in the UI. It's Link to the Past. One of the only real differences is that you collect animals as you progress and they give you abilities. It's not as good as Link to the Past, but few games are. It's still really solid, though, and worth a shot. Then we have Glay Lancer, which is a shoot-'em-up from 1992 where you control your satellite weapons independently from your ship. You can set them to different formations, have them orbit you, have them shoot in opposite directions. The mechanical expressiveness here is pretty wild for the hardware and pretty wild for the era. What else is wild are cart prices, because they're genuinely absurd, but you know what? Emulation is free. And then last, we have Beyond Oasis, which is also known as Story of Thor in some areas. It's an action RPG, it's got elemental spirits, it's got stunning visuals, and great combat. I honestly think it's one of the best games on the system, but it went up against a bunch of other great games and lost. But on the Arc, with the feel of a Genesis controller, it's exactly what it was always supposed to be. The Nintendo DS was a weird machine, and I mean that in the best possible way. You had 2 screens, one of which you could touch, and games were designed around both these screens simultaneously. You'd have your maps on the bottom or your video on the bottom and your action on top. The stylus-based puzzles in Hotel Dusk, the touchscreen mechanics in Trauma Center, the bottom screen inventory in Zelda Phantom Hourglass. You can play most DS games either without the second screen or with it in a little corner, but you're not getting the experience the developers intended. And for a long time, there wasn't a great answer for this in the handheld emulation space. You'd either stack your screens awkwardly on one display or swap between them manually, and neither of them felt right. The Anbernic RG DS is Anbernic's first dual-screen device, and it's a genuine solution to this problem. You have 2 4-inch IPS screens, they're both touchscreens, they both support capacitive stylus input, and you have an RK3568 processor, which with Gamma OS for the Android side, or Rocknix, or the actual Anbernic Linux, it handles the DS library very well. And your color options, your black and crimson, your turquoise blue here, your polar white, they're all direct callbacks to DS Lite colorways. And oh, by the way, it folds closed with a Hall magnetic switch, so it goes to sleep when you close it exactly the way the DS did. And again, stock OS on here has some quirks. So Gamma OS is the way you want to go if you want to stick to Android, and Rocknix is the way to go if you want Linux. So basically, after having a little bit of extra time in the oven to cook, this thing is getting pretty close to the real DS experience, which is close you can get outside of actual hardware. Speaking of actual hardware, check out my DS Pico video linked in the corner. Hidden gem time. First up is Suikoden Tierkreis, which I obviously said that correct. This is a full Suikoden game built specifically for the DS. 108 recruitable characters, a branching story, genuinely more content than you would believe exists on this hardware. If you've ever loved any game in the Suikoden series, this belongs in your library. Up next is Soloto Roboto Red the Hunter. CyberConnect 2, the people who make all the Naruto Ultimate Ninja games, they also made this weird, beautiful, ambitious action RPG for the DS in 2010, and it flew completely under the radar and never got a sequel. I think it's one of the most charming games I've ever played, except no one else has actually played it, but you have no excuse now because I told you about it. And last is Hotel Dusk, Room 215. It's a noir mystery game where you hold the DS like a book and you interrogate suspects and solve puzzles. It uses both screens in a way that only really works in this form factor. And on the RGDS with dual touchscreens, it plays exactly the way it was meant to be played. Do not sleep on this one. Up next is the Nintendo 3DS, and this section requires a little bit of honesty because 3DS emulation is genuinely difficult. Citra and its successors Lime and Azahar require a pretty capable chip to run well. I tried to run 3DS games on underpowered devices for a while, and it's not great. You got slowdowns, audio issues, games that technically work, but they play at 3/4 speed. And for 3DS to feel the way 3DS is supposed to feel, you need real horsepower. And that means the device for this system is not a budget pick. It is the AYN Thor. The base, the Pro, and the Max versions all run the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is a genuinely powerful chip that handles 3DS emulation at full speed with tons of upscaling headroom. The Lite version runs a Snapdragon 865, which still does the job for pretty much the entire library. And, most importantly, this is a clamshell device. It has two OLED screens, a 6-inch top screen at 1080p and 120 Hz, and a 3.92-inch bottom screen. And this is essentially the 3DS form factor, your top screen for action, your bottom screen for maps and menus and touch input. When you are playing a 3DS game on this device at 4x resolution on these OLED panels, it doesn't look like emulation. It looks better than the actual original hardware. And I say this as someone who, if you watch the video, I got a lot of feelings about the 3DS. My wife gave me a 3DS XL before we got married, and I've mentioned it before, but that system means a lot to me. So playing 3DS games on the Thor, watching these beautiful graphics fill up the big OLED panels at upscaled resolution, and even throwing on texture packs to make games like Fire Emblem Awakening look like they're Switch remasters, it's pretty awesome. The Thor has a 6,000 mAh battery, active cooling to prevent throttling, Hall effect sticks, and it weighs 380 grams. It's not cheap, but for the best 3DS emulation you can get right now, it is definitely the right tool. Okay, hidden gems time, and you're probably surprised there's no Fire Emblem in here, but I think I've done it to death. We're going to start with Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology. This was originally a DS game, and then it got a full expansion and remaster for 3DS in 2017. It's a time travel JRPG by Atlas with one of the best stories I've ever experienced in this genre. It should be in the same conversation as Chrono Trigger. It's not, for reasons I genuinely don't understand, but if you like narrative-driven JRPGs, this one is mandatory. It is great. Up next is Ever Oasis. Grezzo made this, the same studio that remade Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask for 3DS. And then in 2017, they made their own game, an action RPG about building a desert oasis town, all while you're dungeon crawling to protect it. It's charming, it's deep, it has a great gameplay loop, and it launched during the death rattle of the 3DS market, and basically nobody played it except me. It deserved a lot better. And then last, we have a complete oddball, Dylan's Rolling Western. Nintendo published this, and it's a tower defense game with action elements where you play as an armadillo gunslinger protecting frontier towns. The art direction is pitch perfect, the mechanics are unique, and it bombed. It just did not do well, but it's really good. You should go play it. And before we get out of here, I want to give a little quick honorable mention to the Anbernic RG35XXSP, which, I don't know, it feels like a regular Nintendo controller to me. I'm not going to talk about my favorite games. We got Ninja Turtles running. But I don't know. This always appealed to me just because it feels like an NES controller, although it doesn't tick enough of the other boxes to really warrant a full mention. That foot soldier's kicking the crap out of him. Well, Gary, the clock on the wall says it's time for What Did We Learn? And we learned that when the form factor is right, you stop noticing the device. You stop thinking about resolution and aspect ratio and chip performance. You just play. You just shoot that guy next to the pier. We learned that the best device isn't always the most powerful one. Sometimes it's just the one that gets out of the way and lets you enjoy the game. Now, I know I didn't cover everything. I got a decent collection, but this hobby is enormous, and it moves fast. So I want to hear from you. What did I miss? Is there a system and a device that fit the way the ones in this video do that I didn't mention? If there is one, drop it in the comments, and be specific. Tell me the system, tell me the device, tell me why the form factor works. If there's enough good answers down there, maybe I'll do a follow-up video. And while you're leaving a comment, please remember to like and subscribe and hype and all that jazz. We're getting so much closer to 100K, and I need that daggum plaque in my living room. And by the way, let me know what sort of video you want to see for the 100,000 subscriber mark as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.